I want you to picture something for me. You are sitting at a table. A nice table. White tablecloths. Good lighting. The kind of restaurant your company books when they want to impress people. You are wearing the dress you bought 3 weeks ago specifically for this dinner. The one you tried on 4 times before you bought it. The one you felt genuinely good in when you looked in the mirror that morning. Your boss is on your left. The VP of your entire division is directly across from you. 12 of your colleagues are seated around the same table. And the man you have been dating for 2 years, the man who sleeps in your apartment, the man whose mother you have met, the man whose hand you held at his father's funeral 8 months ago, that man picks up his fork, looks at your plate, and says in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Babe, are you sure you need all of that?" And then he laughs. Like it was a joke. Like it was nothing. Like the entire table wasn't just watching your face. Feel that. Feel the specific temperature of that moment. The way the air changes. The way you can hear your own heartbeat. The way your brain runs through 17 responses in about half a second and lands on the only one that feels survivable in that specific room. You smile. You say something light. You pick up your fork. And you keep eating. Because you are a professional. Because your boss is watching. Because you have worked too hard for too long to let this specific man, make you cry at a work dinner. My name is Emma Calloway. And what I just described happened to me on a Thursday evening in October. But here is the thing about that moment that nobody at that table could have known. I had already made a decision 3 seconds before I smiled. And that decision was not about Ryan. It was about me. And what I was finally willing to admit about myself. Stay with me. Because this story starts at a dinner table but it ends somewhere nobody in that restaurant could have predicted. And if you have ever smiled through something that deserved a completely different reaction, I think you are going to understand every single word of what I am about to tell you. Hit that subscribe button right now because stories like this one are what this channel is built for. Real ones. Complicated ones. The kind that stay with you. Subscribe and let's get into it. Let me tell you about Ryan before I tell you what he did. Because this is important. Because Ryan was not a monster. And I need you to understand that before we go any further. Because the easiest version of this story is the one where Ryan is simply a terrible person and I was simply too blind to see it. But that is not the true version. The true version is more uncomfortable than that. Ryan was funny. Genuinely funny in the way that makes you laugh before you even realize you are laughing. The kind of humor that finds the absurdity in ordinary things. The kind that makes a Tuesday evening feel like an event. Ryan was smart. He read things. Remembered things. Had opinions about things that were worth hearing. Could talk to anyone about anything and make them feel like the most interesting person in the room. Ryan was present. When you were with him you felt like you were actually with him. Not half with him and half somewhere else. He looked at you when you talked. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered small details you had mentioned weeks earlier and brought them back up at surprising moments. And Ryan was good at the beginning. Really good. The kind of good that makes you lower walls you built specifically to protect yourself. I met him at a mutual friend's birthday party in October 2 years before the dinner. He was standing by the window holding a drink he was barely touching and looking at the room like he was making quiet assessments of everything in it. I thought he looked interesting. He thought I looked. And these were his actual first words to me, like someone who was also trying to figure out the fastest route to the food table. I laughed. He was right. We spent 4 hours at that party talking. Just talking. About work and cities and families and the specific loneliness of being good at your job and still feeling like you are constantly behind somehow. About the strange mathematics of adult friendships and why they get harder to maintain the older you get. About the last book that actually changed the way you thought about something. By the end of that night I had his number and the particular feeling of having been genuinely seen by a stranger. That feeling. That is what I want to talk to you about for a minute. Because that feeling, the feeling of being genuinely seen, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It is the reason people stay in relationships they should have left years earlier. It is the reason the beginning of something can sustain a person through years of something that has quietly become different. Ryan saw me at that party. And I spent 2 years trying to get back to that feeling. Even when everything around it was telling me it was gone. Actually, I want to pause here and ask you something. Because I think a lot of people watching this have stayed somewhere longer than they should have specifically because of how good the beginning was. Because the person you fell for at the start is so vivid in your memory that you keep looking for them in the person standing in front of you now. Drop a comment if that resonates. Drop anything. Just I understand this if that is all you have. Because I read every single one and I want to know how many of us have been here. The first comment happened 4 months into dating Ryan. And I want to be very precise about this because the precise details matter. Because the precise details are what make the difference between something you notice and something you dismiss. We were getting ready to go out. Nothing special. Dinner with 2 of his friends from college. I was wearing jeans and a top I liked. I felt good. I had done my hair. I was ready. Ryan looked at me. Then he tilted his head slightly. Just slightly. And said, "Is that what you're wearing?" 4 words. And I want you to sit with those 4 words for a second. Because on their own they sound like almost nothing. Like a question. Like maybe he just meant is that your final choice. Like maybe he was asking because he was going to suggest somewhere fancier and wanted to know if he needed to dress up more. That is what I told myself. So I said yes, why? And he said, "Nothing. You look fine. Just different than what I pictured." Fine. Not great. Not beautiful. Not I love that on you. Fine. And different than what he pictured. I changed my top. I didn't think much about it at the time. That is the honest truth. I changed my top and I went to dinner and I had a good time and the comment floated away into the back of my memory where small uncomfortable things go to live quietly. But here is the thing about small uncomfortable things that live in the back of your memory. They do not stay quiet forever. They collect friends. The second comment happened 6 weeks later. We were watching television and I was eating chips. Just regular chips on a regular evening, and he reached over and gently moved the bowl. Not dramatically, not rudely, just gently moved it. And when I looked at him he said, "Just looking out for you, babe. Looking out for me." 2 bags of chips at 10 p.m. was him looking out for me. I said something like, "Ha, okay," and reached the bowl back. He didn't say anything else. But the way he looked when I reached it back. That look. I felt it somewhere I could not name at the time. The third comment was the one that should have stopped everything. We were at his friend's wedding. I was wearing a dress I had bought for the occasion. I had spent more money on it than I usually spent on clothes. I felt genuinely beautiful in it. His mother was there and she had hugged me and said I looked wonderful. During the reception Ryan leaned close to my ear. And he said, "I'm glad you wore the rap style. More forgiving. More forgiving." I want you to think about what it takes to say those words to the woman you love at her first event with your family. I want you to think about the calculation involved in that sentence. The selection of those specific words. The choice of that specific moment. More forgiving. I smiled. I said something that sounded like a laugh. And I held that sentence inside my chest for the rest of that wedding and all the way home and into the next day and the next week, and quietly, steadily, it began to do its work. You see. And this is the thing I need you to understand before we get to the dinner. Ryan never called me fat. Not once. Not in 2 years. What he did was something more sophisticated than that. He built a language. A private language between just the 2 of us where the message was always the same but the words were always deniable. Always light enough to be dismissed as nothing. Always precise enough to land exactly where he intended. And I let him build it. Not because I was weak. Because I was used to making people comfortable at the expense of my own. And that habit, that very old, very deep habit of absorbing things to keep the peace, is what I had never fully examined until a bathroom at a company dinner forced me to. I need to tell you about my job because my job is the context for everything that happened next. I am a senior account director at a mid-sized marketing agency. I have been there for 6 years. I started as a junior coordinator making just enough money to cover rent and not much else. I worked my way up through 3 promotions, 2 restructurings, 1 acquisition, and 1 very difficult year where I was managing the accounts of 3 different directors simultaneously because 2 of them left within 6 weeks of each other. I am good at my job. I say that not with arrogance but with the specific confidence of someone who has the track record to back it up. My accounts renew. My clients send emails to my boss about me. My retention rate is among the highest in the agency. My boss is a woman named Diane. She is meticulous, demanding, generous with credit when it is earned, and the kind of manager who makes you want to work harder specifically because she is paying attention. She noticed me early and she has been quietly in my corner ever since. The VP of our division is a man named Marcus Webb. He is the kind of person who is always in the room where decisions get made and always somehow ends up with credit for those decisions. He is not malicious. He is just strategically present in a way that takes years to recognize for what it is. I liked my job. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely liked it. It was hard and occasionally political and sometimes exhausting, but it was mine in the way that things are yours when you built them from the bottom up. And the annual company dinner was a big deal. This was not a casual team lunch. This was the event where the agency brought in its most important clients, its senior leadership, and its top performers and essentially said, "Look at what we have built." Being invited meant something. I had been invited for 5 consecutive years. Ryan knew exactly what this dinner was. He knew exactly who would be there. He knew exactly what it meant to me. And he looked at my plate of food and said, "Babe, are you sure you need all of that?" In front of all of them, and laughed. I want to take you back to that table now, because I described the moment at the beginning of this story, but I did not tell you everything that happened in it. I gave you the surface. Now I want to give you the underneath. The dinner had been going well. That matters. It had been genuinely going well. The conversation was good. Diane was in a warm mood. Marcus was telling a story that was actually funny. The clients at the far end of the table were laughing. The wine was excellent. The food was extraordinary. And I was happy. I want to say that clearly. In that moment before it happened, I was sitting at that table feeling proud. Genuinely proud of the evening, of my career, of the fact that I was in this room with these people doing this thing. I had ordered the salmon with roasted vegetables and a sauce I had been eyeing on the menu since I sat down. When the plates arrived, Ryan looked at mine. Just for a second. The way you glance at something. And then, in the voice he used when he was performing casualness, the voice I recognized now, the voice that meant the comment had been waiting, he said it. "Babe, are you sure you need all of that?" And then he laughed. The small laugh that said this is a joke. The laugh that made me the person who couldn't take a joke if I reacted. For things happened simultaneously in my body. My face went warm. My stomach dropped. My hands went still on the table. And something in the very center of my chest, something that had been quietly tightening for about 18 months, went completely suddenly calm. Not numb. Calm. The difference is important. Numb is absence. Calm is decision. I smiled. I said something like, "I think I'll manage," with a light little laugh. Picked up my fork. Diane looked at me for exactly 1 second. Not a long look. A specific one. The kind of look women give each other across tables when something has just happened that cannot be addressed right now. I gave her back the smallest nod. And I kept eating. Every single bite. 20 minutes later I excused myself. I walked across the restaurant floor toward the restrooms. I kept my pace normal. I kept my expression normal. I said excuse me to a server who was passing. I smiled at a woman I recognized from another agency at a different table. I pushed open the bathroom door. The bathroom was empty. I stood at the sink and looked at my reflection. And I did not cry. I want to be specific about that. I did not cry. Not because I did not feel anything, but because what I was feeling was not sadness. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when something that has been quietly building for a long time finally reaches the surface, and you can see its full shape for the first time. I stood at that sink and I thought about the 4 comments. The "Is that what you're wearing?" The "Move chips bowl." The "More forgiving dress." And now this. And I thought about something else. Something I had been refusing to look at directly for months. I thought about the fact that I had changed my behavior for Ryan without ever deciding to. I thought about the fact that I had started choosing certain clothes over others not because of how they made me feel but because of how he might react. That I had started ordering things at restaurants with a background awareness of what he might say. That I had started working out not for the reasons I used to work out, but with a quiet anxious energy that felt nothing like health. I had been slowly, without noticing, reorganizing myself around his comfort. And standing in that bathroom looking at my reflection I thought, I did not build a career for 6 years and fight for every promotion and earn every client and make every sacrifice to be reorganized. I took out my phone. I called my best friend. Her name is Jess. And what Jess said to me in that bathroom changed the entire direction of what happened next. But before I tell you what Jess said, and I promise we are getting there, I need to tell you something about Jess that most people in my life did not know. Because it matters. It matters more than anything else in this story. And if you think you know where this is going, I am almost certain you do not. Jess and I have been best friends since we were 11 years old. 23 years. Through 3 cities, 2 cross-country moves for serious relationships between us, 1 health scare, 2 career crises, and more ordinary Tuesday phone calls than either of us could count. Jess knows everything about me. The things I tell people and the things I do not. The version of me that is competent and composed at work and the version that calls her from parking lots at 11 p.m. because something has been sitting wrong for weeks and I cannot figure out what it is. She is an HR director at a large corporation. A corporation I am going to describe very carefully. It is a marketing and communications firm, mid-sized, with offices in 4 cities, and a founder who had been growing it aggressively for the last 3 years through a series of strategic acquisitions. One of those acquisitions, completed about 14 months before the dinner, was a smaller agency. A smaller agency where a man named Ryan currently worked. My Ryan. Now here is the thing. Jess had never told me she worked at the parent company of Ryan's firm. Not because she was hiding it from me, but because when Jess and I talked, we talked about real things, feelings, patterns, history, the deep stuff, not org charts and corporate structures. I knew what company she worked at. I just had not connected it to Ryan's employer because I had never thought to, until 3 months before the dinner, when Jess connected it herself, and found something in her HR system that made her go very quiet on a phone call with me for a full 30 seconds. She did not tell me what she found that night. She told me she would tell me when the time was right. I had thought about that 30 seconds of silence approximately once a day since then. Standing in that bathroom, hand shaking slightly on my phone, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" she said immediately, like she had been waiting. "Bathroom," I said. "Work dinner." Ryan just. "I know," she said. I stopped. "What do you mean you know?" I said. And Jess said 4 words that I will remember for the rest of my life. "Emma, it's time. Listen. I am going to tell you what Jess told me. But first I need you to understand something about how information lands when you receive it in a bathroom at a company dinner, while your boyfriend is sitting 30 feet away eating his meal and your boss and the VP of your division are at the same table. Information does not land cleanly in that context. It lands in pieces. You hear the first piece and your brain tries to process it, while simultaneously monitoring the door and calculating how long you have been gone, and deciding what expression to put back on your face when you return. So let me give it to you the way I received it. Piece by piece. Piece 1. Ryan had been telling people at his company, colleagues, his manager, people at his level and above, that his girlfriend worked at a competing agency. That is not unusual. People mention their partners' jobs. Piece 2. Ryan had been specifically telling people that his girlfriend had given him strategic information about client accounts. Information he had used in at least 2 new business pitches. Information that had contributed to at least 1 account win. Piece 3. Ryan's company and my company were in active discussions about a potential partnership. The partnership involved sharing certain client categories to avoid conflict. Ryan had been positioned as a key facilitator of this partnership because of his, and I want to get this exact, because of his insight into how the other side operated. That other side was my company. That insight was me. I stood in that bathroom and I held those 3 pieces of information, and I understood something that reorganized every memory of the previous 2 years. The comments about my body. They were not random. They were not insecurity. They were not even cruelty in the conventional sense. They were control. A person who is quietly using you for professional advancement needs to make sure you do not feel too confident, too certain of yourself, too stable. A person who is extracting value from you needs you to be slightly off balance, slightly dependent on their approval, slightly unsure, not broken, just unsteady enough to stay. Is that what you're wearing? The moved bowl, the more forgiving, the dinner, all of it was a system, and I had been living inside it for 2 years without knowing it had walls. I looked at myself in that mirror one more time, and I thought about something very specific. I thought about the pitch meeting I had told Ryan about 8 months ago. The one where we were going after a major retail account. The one I had stayed up until 2 in the morning preparing for. The one I had told him about in bed on a Sunday morning because I was excited and he was there and he listened the way he listened at the beginning. We did not win that pitch. The account went to a competitor. I had assumed we simply lost. I was now reconsidering that assumption. I took a breath. I straightened my dress. I put my phone back in my clutch. And I walked back out to the table, smiling. I want to tell you about the rest of that dinner because the rest of that dinner is one of the things I am most proud of in my entire adult life. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because nothing dramatic happened. I sat back down at that table and I was the most present, most engaged, most professionally warm version of myself for the remaining 90 minutes of that evening. I laughed at the right moments. I contributed to the conversation in ways that were substantive and noticed. I caught Diane's eye twice and each time I gave her a smile that said I am completely fine and also I will tell you everything later. I ate every bite of my dinner. Ryan refilled my wine glass once and I said thank you and touched his arm briefly the way I always did and his face relaxed in a way that told me he believed the dinner comment had already been absorbed and forgiven the way everything else had been absorbed and forgiven. He believed we were fine. I let him believe that. Because I had learned something in that bathroom. I had learned that the most powerful move available to me was not the one that felt the most immediate. The most powerful move was the one that could not be undone. And that move was going to require a few days. Not tonight. Not a scene. Not the satisfaction of watching his face change at a table full of people. Something better. Something permanent. When the dinner ended, Ryan held my coat and I thanked him and he put his arm around me on the way to the car, and I leaned into him slightly and I thought, 2 more days. Just 2 more days. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was upset. Because my brain would not stop working. I lay in the dark next to Ryan and I ran through everything Jess had told me and I mapped it against my own memory, and every time I found a match. Every time a piece of her information connected to something I remembered. Something tightened and then released in my chest like a knot being undone. The retail pitch. I thought about that specifically. I had told Ryan the strategy. Not the confidential parts. But the approach. The angle we were taking. The specific client pain point we had identified and were going to lead with. 2 weeks later, that same pain point was the centerpiece of a competitor pitch. A competitor. Not Ryan's company. But Jess had told me something else. Something I had not fully processed in the bathroom. Ryan had a contact at that competitor. A college friend. Who was on the pitch team. I lay in the dark and I did the math. And then at 4:30 in the morning I got up quietly, went to my home office and opened my laptop. I spent 3 hours going through my own emails. Looking for anything I might have forwarded to Ryan. Any pitch deck I might have sent him to get his opinion on design. Any document that contained information that should have stayed inside my company. I found 7 emails over 14 months where I had shared things with my boyfriend because he was my boyfriend and I trusted him and he was interested and supportive and asked good questions. 7 emails. I sat in my home office at 7:30 in the morning looking at those 7 emails. And I made a list. Not a list like the one from our first story. Not a Midnight Notes app list of emotions and patterns. A professional list. Dates. Emails. Pitch information. Corresponding competitor activity. Timeline of Ryan's company's partnership discussions with mine. The kind of list you bring to a meeting. The kind of list that does not get dismissed. At 8:15 I called Jess. She picked up immediately. I have 7, I said. A pause. Send them to me, she said. What are you going to do with them? I asked. What I do with everything that comes across my desk, she said. My job. I sent them. Then I went back to the bedroom. Ryan was still asleep. I looked at him for a moment, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just a very clean, very complete sadness. For the version of him I had thought he was. For the 2 years of a relationship that had been something other than what I believed it was. For the Sunday morning when I had told him about the retail pitch with coffee in my hand, and he had listened with such genuine seeming interest and I had felt so seen. He was not the person I thought I was loving. He was very good at seeming like that person. There is a difference. And that difference is everything. I gave myself 2 days. Day 1 I went to work and did my job and was completely normal. I answered emails. I sat in 3 meetings. I had lunch with a colleague. I did not go to Diane yet because I needed the list to be complete before I did. Day one evening Ryan came over and made dinner and we watched a show we had been watching together and he fell asleep on the couch and I sat next to him and felt the specific sadness of knowing something is about to end that the other person does not know yet. Day 2 I added 3 more items to the list. Day 2 afternoon I sent Jess an updated version. Day 2 evening I told Ryan I needed to talk. And here is where I need to tell you something. Because I think people expect a confrontation story to have a big dramatic scene. Screaming. Accusations. Someone storming out. The full theater of a relationship ending. This was not that. I sat Ryan down at my kitchen table. I told him what I knew. Not with anger. Not with tears. With a clarity and a calmness that I think genuinely frightened him more than any of the alternatives would have. I told him about Jess. About what she had found. About the 7 emails. About the retail pitch. About the college friend at the competitor. About the partnership discussions and his strategic position in them. I told him everything. And then I stopped talking. And I watched his face. The first expression was the one I expected. Denial. The immediate reflexive denial of someone caught in something. The second expression was the one I had not prepared for. Relief. Just for a second. Half a second. Almost invisible. But I saw it. And I understood then that the weight of maintaining this had been something he was carrying too. That the performance of caring while extracting had its own cost. That somewhere underneath the strategy was a person who was tired of it. That did not make it okay. But it made him human. And it made the ending cleaner. He did not fight it. He did not try to convince me. He sat at my kitchen table and he said, "I'm sorry, Emma." And I looked at him and I said, "I know." He left that night. He took what he had brought over gradually, the toothbrush, the phone charger, the jacket on the hook by the door, and he left. And I sat in my quiet apartment and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I told Diane 3 days after Ryan left. Not the personal parts. Not the 2 years of body comments and dinner moments and changed tops. That was mine. That was not work's business. The professional parts. The 7 emails. The pitch information. The competitor connection. The partnership discussions. I brought the list. Diane read it in silence. When she finished she looked up at me. And she said, "How long have you known?" "For days," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you come to me immediately?" And I said, "Because I needed to be sure. And because I needed to end it on my own terms before it became something else." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. And said, "Okay. Leave this with me." I left it with her. 3 weeks later the partnership discussions between our agency and Ryan's company were quietly discontinued. Ryan's company was informed that certain information had come to light that made the partnership inadvisable. Ryan did not lose his job. I want to be clear about that. I was not trying to destroy him. I was trying to protect what I had built. Those are different things. But certain opportunities at his company became unavailable to him. Certain doors closed. Certain paths became longer. And the college friend at the competitor was made aware that the information he had received was not ethically sourced. What he did with that knowledge was his decision. I did not follow what happened after that. I did not need to. I want to go back to the comments now. Because I have been telling you about the professional betrayal and I think it would be easy to let the body comments become a footnote in that story. A detail. Something that matters less because the other thing matters more. I do not want that. Because the body comments were not less than the professional betrayal. They were connected to it. But they were also their own thing entirely. And their own thing is what I need to talk about now. Because here is what I understood when I was standing in that bathroom. Ryan's comments did not create my insecurity. They found it. The insecurity was already there. Built over years of a culture that has 1,000 ways of telling women that their physical existence requires constant management and monitoring and improvement. Built over a lifetime of before and after images and magazine covers and comments from well-meaning relatives at holiday dinners and fitting rooms with lighting specifically designed to make you feel like you need to buy something to fix yourself. Ryan did not invent the language he used on me. He just learned it. The way people learn languages. By living in an environment where it was spoken. Where it was normal. Where it was even sometimes framed as care. And here is the thing I have thought about the most in the year since the dinner. I had been speaking that same language to myself. Long before Ryan. The moved chips bowl was cruel. The more forgiving dress was cruel. The dinner comment was cruel. But the voice in my head that had nodded along to all of it, that voice was mine. And that voice was the one I actually needed to have a conversation with. Not Ryan. Not the table full of colleagues. My own voice. The one that had been agreeing with the message underneath the comments even while my mouth was saying, I think I'll manage. 6 weeks after the dinner I started therapy. I want to say that plainly and without drama because I think it gets dramatized in a way that makes it feel like an extreme measure when it is actually just a decision to pay attention to yourself. My therapist's name is Dr. Anita Webb. She is not related to Marcus Webb from my office, which I find mildly funny. In our first session she asked me to describe myself. I talked for about 4 minutes about my job. She waited. I talked for another 2 minutes about my friendships. She waited. Then she said, what about your body? How would you describe your relationship with your body? And I sat there for probably 15 seconds, which in a therapy office is a very long time. And I said, I think I have been treating my body like a problem I am managing rather than a home I am living in. Dr. Webb nodded. She said, when do you think that started? And I said, long before Ryan. She said, yes, I suspected. We have been working on that for a year now. It is the most important work I have ever done. Not because Ryan sent me there. He did not. He was just the most recent in a series of mirrors that had been showing me the same reflection for years. He was just the first one that showed it to me in a room full of people at a work dinner in a voice loud enough that I could not talk myself out of hearing it. Sometimes the thing that breaks you open is not the worst thing that has ever happened to you. It is just the thing that finally breaks you open. And sometimes that is exactly what needs to happen. I want to tell you one more thing about Jess. About 3 months after everything happened, Jess and I were sitting on my apartment floor eating takeout directly from the containers the way we have been doing since we were in our 20s. And I asked her something I had been wanting to ask since the bathroom. I said, when you found the information about Ryan in your system 3 months before the dinner, why did you wait to tell me? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because you weren't ready. I looked at her. You would have defended him, she said. 3 months ago you would have heard it and found a way to make it not true. I have known you for 23 years. I know the difference between when you are ready to hear something hard and when you are not. I thought about that. What made you think I was ready at the dinner? I said. She said, because you called me from the bathroom instead of going back to the table and pretending it never happened. You called me from the bathroom 5 minutes after it happened, which meant you were not going to let it go this time. Which meant you were ready. I sat with that for a long time. And then I said, you gambled on my timing. And she said, I bet on you. There's a difference. There is a difference. She is one of the best people I have ever known. 1 year after that dinner, I am going to tell you where things stand. Because I think endings matter. I think the version of the story that just ends at the dramatic moment is incomplete. Life does not end at the dramatic moment. Life continues in ordinary increments after the dramatic moment, and those increments are where most of the actual living happens. Ryan is no longer in my life. We have not spoken since he left my apartment. I do not know what is happening in his professional situation in any detail. I do not want to. My job is good. The retail account that I believe we lost because of a leaked pitch strategy is not coming back, but a different account of similar size came in 4 months after everything happened. Diane and I have never spoken directly about Ryan again. She did what she said she would do and then she moved on, and I am grateful for exactly that. Jess and I still eat takeout on my apartment floor approximately once a month. And me. I want to tell you about me. I go to therapy every other week. I am learning slowly and imperfectly the difference between discipline that comes from respect for myself and discipline that comes from fear of judgment. I am learning that those two things can look identical from the outside and feel completely different from the inside. I went back to the restaurant where the dinner happened. Just once. Just for lunch with a colleague. On purpose. I ordered what I wanted. I ate every bite. And nobody said a single word about my plate. And I realized sitting there that the silence had always been available to me. That most rooms do not comment on what you eat. That the voice I had internalized as the ambient noise of the world was actually just one person. One person. Who no longer sits at my table. Okay. We have been here a while and I want to say something before I let you go. This story started at a dinner table with a comment about food. But it was never about food. It was about what happens when you absorb so many small diminishments that you stop being able to feel the shape of yourself clearly. When the voice that is supposed to be yours starts sounding like someone else's. When you reorganize around someone else's comfort for so long that you forget what your own comfort feels like. And it was about what happens when one moment in a bathroom, one phone call, one piece of information arriving at exactly the right time, breaks something open that needed to be broken open. I am not going to tell you Ryan was a monster. I am going to tell you he was someone who found the exact frequency of my existing insecurity and tuned to it. And that is something that can only happen when an insecurity exists to be found. The work I am most proud of from this last year is not the list I made. It is not the conversation with Diane. It is not the professional outcome. It is the conversation I started having with my own voice. The one that had been agreeing with things it should have questioned for a very long time. That conversation is ongoing. It will probably always be ongoing. But I am having it now. And that is more than I could say 1 year ago. If any part of this story landed somewhere real, if you have ever reorganized yourself around someone else's comfort, if you have ever smiled through something that deserved a completely different reaction, if you have ever let a small comment go because fighting it felt like more trouble than absorbing it, I want you to know that the pattern can end. It does not end dramatically. It ends in bathrooms. In phone calls to the right person at the right moment. In the decision to eat every bite of your dinner. And it ends with the conversation you start having with yourself when you finally get quiet enough to hear what you actually think. That conversation is waiting for you. It has been waiting for a while. I hope you start it soon. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you are carrying that you have been telling yourself is not a big deal. Tell me about the small comments you have absorbed. Tell me if this story gave you something you needed today. I read everything. I am here. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs it. You already know who that person is. Subscribe if you are new. New story every single day. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one.